Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Kabbalah of Meaning, our 6-week journey uncovering Jewish wisdom for finding the purpose that connects all parts of life. Today we'll be doing lesson 1, which is titled The Meaning We Seek. And before we even dive into the lesson, I just wanted to take a few minutes, especially since there's some of you that have never been to any of these courses, and there's some that are watching the videos I know that haven't been to any of the courses. So it's always good to start off with some housekeeping. Just a few things that I always mention at the beginning of each course. Firstly, this is a 6-lesson course, which will meet every Monday. So today is lesson 1. Next week we'll do lesson 2. We are going to go through Thanksgiving. So if you'll be out of town for Thanksgiving weekend and you won't be back by Monday, feel free to tune in on Zoom from wherever you are. This course is given, like all my courses, on 2/3 tracks. 2 tracks live, and then one of them is a recording. And you do not need to let me know which one you'll be attending. Any week, it's always nice when I know when to expect you, but any week you can always choose to show up whenever you'd like, either 1 p.m. on this Zoom. It's the same link every single week, so if you got here this week, that means you'll be able to get here in future weeks. And 7:30 p.m. in person, which includes dinner. That's here at Chabad in the main shul. That's our main crowd. That's usually when we get 30, 40 people. Or at 9:30 p.m. in your inbox, you can expect an email from me every Monday at 9:30 p.m., which will include a recording of this Zoom session, which you can, if you can't make it to either of the 2 live sessions, you can watch that recording at your leisure and catch up with us the next week. The course format is essentially like a lecture, but I try to make it as interactive as possible. So there are readings that kind of support the lecture, and I go around and ask people to read. If you don't like reading in public, that's okay. Just wave me along and I'll pick on the next guy. There are slides that support the readings, as well as occasional video presentations. So on Zoom, that's easy; it's right here. And in person, if you have a hard time seeing slides from far away, make sure you sit closer to the front. And that is that. As we go along, I'll make opportunities for questions. I usually do not like when the questions come kind of smack in the middle, unless it's literally part of the flow of the lesson. I'll ask you to hold it for later. So these pens are your best friend. I'm sure some of you have them at home, these Pasadena Jewish Academy wonderful pens. Write down your questions, definitely at the end. I always make time for questions, and usually, depending on how long the lesson is taking and where we're going, I can usually break in the middle for questions. Let's take a moment to talk about emails. You should have gotten an email this morning from me at about 9 o'clock in the morning, which welcomed you to the course and informed you that the lesson is coming up this evening. I assume most of you got it. That's how you're here. You had the link to get into the Zoom. You can expect an email like that each week in the morning, on Monday morning. And then on Monday evening at 9:30, you'll expect a follow-up email. In that follow-up email, in addition to the recording, which I mentioned, you will also see links to things that I might reference or recommend, an article, a video, a book recommendation, whatever it is. Throughout the lesson, I try to put those in the follow-up lesson. I also put a link to any videos we play, a link to any slides that I show, like that. If there's anything that caught your fancy, this is particularly relevant to the in-person folks. I can't tell you how many times I pull up a slide and we're making a good point and it's a very impactful point, and somebody takes a picture of the slides because they want to hold on to it, and that's fine. But I always tell them, hey, you're going to get the slide in the email and you can save that slide if you want to print it out, etc. I actually have a slide here on my wall from an event that I once attended, which had an inspiring quote, and I remember I liked that slide, and he sent out his slides, and I have it printed here on the wall of my office. So I relate with that feeling. The most important point of the follow-up email is for you to hit the reply button. I love feedback. I love when people tell me what a good job I did. I love even more than that when people tell me I did a horrible job, or they disagree vehemently with everything that I said. So please do that, even if it's just a big thumbs up or something like that. Hit the reply button on the emails. Let me know what you thought of the lesson. Ask me questions. I'm always available for you by email, by text, by phone. You all have my contact information. I'm not one of these guys that chooses to hide my contact information. Instead, I choose to just be very busy. I think that's enough on the housekeeping end of things. So without further ado, let's dive into lesson 1. Welcome, Ron. Let's dive into lesson 1, the meaning we seek. Today's lesson is generously sponsored by Jeff Anson, who I think many of you know. He will be here this evening, and we want to wish him a very happy birthday. His birthday was yesterday, and he's sponsoring today's lesson in honor of his birthday. If you would like to sponsor a future lesson, please just reach out and let me know. We are going to open today's lesson with a quote from one of the most profound explorations for the quest of meaning. And this is found in the book of Kohelet. Kohelet is a book written by King Solomon. The English name of Kohelet is Ecclesiastes, and it's authored by King Solomon. King Solomon, who in Jewish tradition is considered the wisest man to ever have lived on the face of the earth, he authored 3 books. Okay, he authored a book called Mishlei, which is Proverbs. He authored a book called why is this escaping my head? Shir HaShirim, which is the Song of Songs. And then he authored the book of Kohelet, which is Ecclesiastes. Now, Shir HaShirim and Mishlei were both composed in his younger years. There's different discussion about exactly when they would have composed, which one came first, but there is unanimous consensus to the fact that Ecclesiastes was his last composition. And I think that that's telling because the text that we're going to read, text 1, and Ron, if I can ask you to read it for us, please, is essentially his reflection on life. So it's the end of life. His life is coming to a close, and he's reflecting on life. And what does he have to say? Ron, if you can read for us, please, text 1.
Okay, the words of Koheleth, son of David, king in Jerusalem. Futility of futilities, said Koheleth. Futility of futilities, all is futile. What profit has man in all his toil, that he toils under the sun? Generation goes and a generation comes, but only the earth endures forever.
So King Solomon, at the end of his life, essentially says all is futile. Now I want to clarify something. At this point in his life, King Solomon has amassed not only riches, not only wisdom, right? Not physical riches, I mean like, literal wealth, right? Not only wisdom, but he's had experiences that are unparalleled. He's had pleasure that is unparalleled. He has had leadership. He's had lots of meaningful things. And yet his consensus is that everything is futile. The futility of it all is I think something that begins to occur to many people at different times in their lives. To some people, it's when they're teenagers. They start thinking about what is this all about? Why am I doing the same thing that everybody else in life is trying to do? Or whatever way that they phrase it, right? To others, it becomes as a midlife crisis. Now that I finally accomplished, I've checked off a lot of the boxes that I wanted. I own a house, I have a wife, I have children, I have a life, I have a good job, I have a good career. It's like, oh, hold on a second, so what's all that for? And to others, it's towards the end of their lives that they start to look back and to reflect and to be like, what have I been doing with my life? Now, if that doesn't lead to depression, at the very least, it leads to reflection. And this is the reason why, in text 2, we're going to quote, and Mark, if I can ask you to read this one for us. In text 2, we're going to be quoting from some of the scientific perspectives on these issues and the statistics that have come out. I think really Dave Barron can tell us a lot about this from a professional perspective, about the rise in the mental health crisis, both here in America and in the West as a whole, and in the modern world as a whole. But Mark, if you can read it for us, please, text 2, we're on page 3.
Depression, anxiety, and substance abuse have reached epidemic proportions globally. In 2017, 66.6 million Americans, more than half of the respondents on the National Survey on Drug Use and Health, reported binge drinking within the past month, and 20 million met the criteria for a substance use disorder. 31% of American adults will develop a full-blown anxiety disorder at some point in their lives, and 19% in any given year. The World Health Organization reports that 264 million people on the planet are depressed. Depression is the third most costly disability worldwide. Each year, 17 million American adults are depressed. Over 16% of youth in late adolescence currently face depression, and the impact of depression on suicide accounts for the second leading cause of death in adolescence, rivaled only by death by auto accident. While the stakes of our mental health crisis are truly life and death, many of us also suffer from the less debilitating though still painful conditions, burnout and chronic stress, trouble concentrating and connecting, loneliness and isolation, lives that are rich in many ways, yet feel somehow narrow, hollow, and cut off. Even when we experience success and satisfaction, we may sense that there's more to happiness, that life could be more joyful, rewarding, and meaningful.
Thank you very much, Mark. I don't think this is news to anybody on this Zoom, but it's important to say it. It's important to understand where we are as a society. We live today in the wealthiest, in the healthiest, in the freest, in the safest society in history. We have the most comforts in history. We have the most luxuries in history. And yet, as Viktor Frankl says, evermore today, people have the means to live, but no meaning to live for. And this is the opening question of our course, of our journey. How do we find meaning? Can we navigate this vast landscape of affluence and success and luxury without feeling the ever-present pang of emptiness and futility that King Solomon seems to have arrived at? There's a lot out there. If you walk into any bookshop, there are thousands and thousands, if not millions, if you combine them all, of books that have been written on this topic. If you go into the self-help section and you look for meaning, if you look for I mean, I guess the whole self-help section is really trying to deal with this. For meaning, for purpose, for guidance, there are authors in every category trying to do their best to tackle this subject. We are not going to try to rival them. We are going to try and narrow our journey for the next 6 weeks by stating clearly what it is we are trying to do. Over the next 6 weeks, we will be turning to one source and one source only, and that is Judaism, to try and find the answer to this question. How do we find meaning in our lives? We are going to turn to Torah, and specifically the Torah that we teach, even though we're not going to really get to real Kabbalistic ideas, but the fundamentals that we're going to be basing these ideas off are going to come from the fundamentals of Kabbalah. The way that Kabbalah views the creation of man, the way that the Kabbalah views the purpose for which man was created, in other words, the fact that man was created by design, that is going to be our guiding light, if you will. And if that flies in the face of some of Western advice today, that's okay. And if it flies in some of the advice of ancient traditions that there are today in modern society, that's okay. We're presenting, as the course name implies, the Kabbalah of meaning. In other words, based on Torah and based on Kabbalistic ideas, how we can live a meaningful life. Now, I want to take a moment before we dive into the first lesson to talk about the format with which we're going to do that. Okay? And the format is a Talmudic format, actually, known as Lo Zu Avzu, which means often in the Talmud, they will state a set of statements, and the set of statements will build on each other, like layers, so to speak. Okay? In that way, this course is going to be taking the same journey over 6 lessons. So, let me clarify that very clearly so that we all understand. In today's lesson, we are going to be providing one answer to the question, which is going to be based on the Torah, based on Kabbalah, but it's going to be one layer of meaning, of how we can live a meaningful life. The purpose of today's lesson is so that when we get to it's going to be a fairly basic. I don't think anybody's mind is going to be blown by today's lesson. It'll be a very nice framework. It'll be very well presented. But by the time we get to the end, you'll be like, none of that was really mind-blowing for me. I've really been trying to do all that in my life. The real purpose of today's lesson is to get to the end of the lesson where we can ask the question, is that enough to live by? Is that all the meaning there is to find in our lives, or is there more? And the answer is going to be a resounding yes, there is more. And lesson 2 is going to pick up where that left off. I think you will find lesson 2 pretty mind-blowing. It'll be a new wrinkle, a new idea, a new way, a new layer of looking at finding meaning in our lives. But still, by the end of lesson 2, we will do the same thing. We will ask, is that all, or can there be even more? So, building on each other, the lessons will provide deeper and deeper and deeper senses of meaning and purpose and intention with which to live our lives. Where by the time we get to lesson 6, we will be saying, what if I don't do any of the 5 lessons that we spoke about previously? Am I still meaningful? And the answer will be yes, and will provide the most core and most essential layer of meaning. Does that make sense to everybody? So different courses are formatted in different ways. Sometimes they're formatted as independent lessons and each lesson is dependent. Sometimes they're formatted as sequential. In this case, they're almost formatted as each one saying the previous lesson is not enough, and almost knocking it down and saying there's more to it. That's the way the course is built. I say this, I guess, for two reasons. Number one, so that you understand what we're doing here, but number two, also so that you don't stake all your don't put all your chips into one basket, right? All your apples into one basket into lesson one or into lesson three. You'll see we're going to get to more and to more and to more, and it's going to get more and more meaningful and deeper as we go along. All right, I thought that was an important introduction, so I just wanted to make that before we start. Okay. I'd like to start the conversation today by examining our own life experiences, because I think before we even start to talk about having a meaningful life, it's important to identify the word meaning. For the purpose of this exercise, I think it's very, very important to distinguish between meaningful experiences and pleasurable experiences, okay? So if you have a textbook, great. I think only 2 of you have a textbook so far. Those of you that don't, I think you have the handout, which is basically the first lesson of the textbook sent as a PDF in the email. If you don't have it yet, you can find it. We're going to be doing an exercise on page 6. And by the way, if you don't have your textbook yet and you'd like to get it from me, I'm available anytime. Come by Kabbalah Pasadena and pick it up. If you need it mailed to you, let me know. I'll be happy to mail it to you. Okay, I have a textbook for you. But on page 6, we have an exercise. Okay, and I'm going to ask volunteers to share. So if you're open to that, I would love that. But essentially, we're asking 3 questions, and you'll see exactly what we're trying to differentiate here. First of all, describe at least one activity that brings you pleasure and that you find meaningful. In other words, an activity that you do often in your life that brings you pleasure, and you also find it to be a meaningful activity. And then let's try and divide those. Describe at least one activity that brings you pleasure, but which you do not find meaningful, and then describe an activity that you find meaningful, but which does not bring you pleasure. Okay? I am going to start off with sharing. You can take your time and read, but I actually think I can share first. Okay? I don't think the first one is going to come as a surprise to anyone. An activity that I find meaningful and also brings me pleasure is teaching. I love to teach. I get a rush out of it. I really feel such an intense pleasure when I can teach someone something and they didn't know something before they walked into a class, or even if we're just standing in shul together and we're schmoozing, and afterwards they learn something. I always get a tremendous amount of pleasure from that, and obviously I find it very meaningful to teach people Torah. Okay, that's that. But there are also things that bring me pleasure and that I don't necessarily find meaningful. Top of that, I would say eating. I love to cook a very delicate. I'm a real foodie. I like to go to restaurants. I like to have a dish that was prepared in a very specific manner, and the texture was paid attention to, and the way that the dish was presented was paid attention to, etc. I don't find it to be a particularly meaningful activity. I find it to be literally pretty much just pleasurable. And then the last one is probably the easiest one for me to answer. There's a lot of elements of Judaism that and this has to do, probably most of you are not going to relate with this. I think most of you, the things that you do that are Jewish, you find them meaningful. And you'll be like, I can't believe this is a rabbi, and he does Jewish things and doesn't necessarily find them meaningful. But the difference is whether you grow up religious or not. So, for example, I grew up religious, doing everything no matter what, and there are a lot of religious experiences, and they're shrinking, Baruch Hashem, as I go through my life, but that fall into the category of, I do them because that's what we do as Jews. Passover Seder or whatever. I don't find eating maror to be particularly meaningful, and I don't find whatever, like davening with a minyan. I don't necessarily see that the davening I find meaningful, but davening with a minyan, not necessarily, especially when it involves waking up early in the morning. And I'm constantly working on those to try to figure out how can I make those also pleasurable. I find those activities meaningful, but not necessarily pleasurable. Does that make sense? I don't enjoy them, but I find them meaningful and important to do. So that's me. Let's hear from other people. What do you think? Anybody? Danny, go ahead. Don't forget to unmute yourself.
So, pleasure and meaningful, community connection and support, and family connection and support.
So relationships.
Yeah.
Okay.
Pleasure, not meaningful. Watching an entertaining movie because 2 weeks later I struggled to even remember what it was about.
I would say, by the way, that's a scathing review of the movie. because there are movies that you like, The Shawshank Redemption or like Inception, that have like these deep themes to them that sometimes you find them meaningful also. But I know 100% what you're talking about. Half the movies, or really 99% of the movies that we watch, we can't remember them a week later. Correct.
That's why I emphasized an entertaining one that gives
Oh, got it. Okay, yeah, not the ones that make you think. Right.
And then meaningful but not pleasure. Well, I worked on Crisis Line, and some of the Crisis Line calls were fairly harrowing.
It was a very painful experience.
They were meaningful but not pleasurable.
Right. Okay. Anybody else want to jump in here? Let's do one more. Go ahead, Dave.
I think for me, the most pleasurable is I love to teach, but I love to learn. When I learn something I didn't know before, or opened up my mind to something, I find that incredibly pleasurable, but very meaningful.
So both. Okay.
So I think the learning may be more so than the teaching.
Right. The learning more so than the teaching. Got it. Okay. Maybe that says something about me. I enjoy teaching more than I enjoy learning from others.
I love teaching, but the learning to me is always something, because I've been doing it for 45 years.
Okay.
I think of something for me, I'm a big sports guy, so I watch lots of sports just because it doesn't, it takes some time, I enjoy it, but I wouldn't say that it's a tremendous amount, and even though I was a long-time athlete and take care of many athletes.
So like the World Series, very pleasurable to watch the Dodgers cream the Blue Jays just now, right? And pull it out at the last second. Not very meaningful. Okay.
And I think the thing that I find meaningful and not so pleasurable is learning from a mistake. I make a mistake, I did something,
I like that.
And I realized that it was painful that I did that. I didn't want to do it, but it might be very meaningful, but not necessarily, oftentimes not necessarily pleasurable. I actually learned that from I learned that from Victor Frank. I had a chance to study with him in Vienna many years ago.
Oh wow!
And an extraordinary human being. I mean, I hope we get to go over some of his stuff, because
we definitely are.
As a Holocaust survivor, and his level of insight was I felt so blessed to be able to hang out with him a little bit in Vienna.
We're not. I should mention right now that we're not gonna quote him as often as we quoted him in the last course. The last course we did was called Beyond Never Again, and the topic was the Holocaust, and it was about extrapolating meaning from the Holocaust. And we did quote Viktor Frankl quite a bit, obviously, but we are going to be quoting Viktor Frankl during this lesson a few times. But I loved your last one about learning from mistakes. Yeah, I don't think there's a single person that finds it pleasurable to learn from mistakes, but it's a very meaningful experience. Yeah, I like that. Okay, so the main approach, and I think that was a very important exercise. We're going to get back to it, by the way. We're going to get back to this exercise also in lesson 5, because I think some of the things that we all mentioned that are technically just pleasurable experiences, but we don't find them to be a meaningful part of our lives, we're going to learn as we go through the course that actually some of the things that are not officially part of the meaning of our lives, we can make them a part of the meaning of our lives. Whole different discussion, not for today. But for today, I want to introduce one core Kabbalistic idea, and that is the importance of self-awareness when it comes to living a meaningful life. In understanding who we are at our core, and when we understand who we are, and we live in alignment, I think that's the word I'm looking for. When we live in alignment with our core, that is going to be the most important, or at least for today's lesson, is going to be the most important thing to have in mind when trying to live a meaningful life. In other words, if you're trying to live meaningful, but you're living life based on a different, why can I not go forward in my slide? Oh, now it went forward too much. Hold on a second. Yeah. If we are living life and not aligned with who we are at our core, with what it means to be a human being, then we are automatically going to feel a sense of emptiness. And if we can live aligned with who we are, then we will automatically have meaning. Let me explain. Imagine, if you will, a talented artist, okay, who loves painting, loves music, loves artistic self-expression, dance, whatever it is, right? But due to, we all know this experience, right? Due to financial pressures or some other reason, they take a quote-unquote stable office job. The one with 9 to 5, gotta come, answer the phones, make sales, whatever it is, right? Bottom line, bottom dollar, charts, finance, whatever it is. With no creative outlet whatsoever. Over time, and usually very quickly, these people begin to feel drained and uninspired, even though they're earning a steady income. In other words, they feel very productive. They're earning the money. They're coming home. They're using that money to support their family, and maybe in the rest of their life they feel meaningful. That's often when people start to express a lack of sense of meaning in their job. But they can be vice versa as well. If somebody's not very good at creating art and being creative, and they're stuck in that position for whatever reason, it's harder to imagine. But right, in other words, it's not really. This isn't really a one-size-fits-all kind of solution. But the part that is one-size-fits-all is that you have to figure out who you are and be in tune, be aligned with that core identity. Now, this obviously is going to apply to each person individually. And in future lessons, we're going to get into how to identify in myself who I am and live in alignment with that. But for starters for today, let's talk about living in alignment with being a human being. What does it mean to be a human being as a whole? Before we get into that human being is Karen Levin or is Elise Iser or is David Marshall. No, just as a whole, what does it mean to live as a human being? So I guess that leads us to ask the question, who or what are we, right? We use the term human being, we use the term homo sapien, we use the term, right, intelligent creatures. What does it mean to be human? Ironically, we're actually going to learn to be human from trees. Let's take a look at text 3. Danny, if you can read for us, please.
When you besiege a city for many days, waging war against it to capture it, do not destroy its trees by wielding an axe against them, for from them you shall eat, and you shall not cut them down. For the tree of the field is a human, that you should besiege it.
So they're doing their best to kind of literally translate and yet also make it make sense in English. I would have added the word is. For is the tree of the field a human, that you should besiege it? You understand? Now, I'll explain in a moment why they didn't do that in their translation. Okay, this is a verse in Deuteronomy. This is a verse in the Torah. On its surface level, it's a simple law. It's a law about fighting a war according to Jewish values. And one of the points, one of the laws is, one of the details, one of the nuanced prohibitions is that if it works out for you, let's say you're diverting and having a surprise attack from behind the enemy, and it works for you to cut through a forest. And as you're cutting through that, or an orchard, or whatever it is, and you want to cut down fruit trees, you're not allowed to cut down the trees in order to fight the war. Okay? All right. That's on its surface level. More generally, this verse is also the origin for Jewish environmentalism, which means I don't know where Judaism would stand like on recycling or stuff like that as a whole in today's society, but as a general approach, Judaism is very, very into protecting our environment, which means not being wasteful, right? This is why every single one of you grew up with a Jewish mother. Well, you grew up with a Jewish mother who told you to finish your plate because if not, you're wasting it, right? And you always wondered, why is it not waste if it goes into me, right? Like if I don't want to eat it, if I'm full already, why is it not waste when it goes into me? And we grew up with a Jewish father. Maybe this was just my father, and I'm projecting here. My father would always finish anything that I left on the plate. Like if there was food left on the plate, he never wanted to go into the trash. And this is a general Jewish value, not to waste. And it comes from this verse, okay? But the Talmud grabs that last line, Ki ha'adam eitz hasada. For a man is like a tree of the field. The Talmud says, hold on a second. This is a euphemism. This is an expression. This is an analogy that the Torah is giving us, which can help us understand what it means to be human. In order to understand what it means to be human, if we can understand what it means to be a tree, then we can learn about what it means to be human. So this is maybe an ironic thing to do, but we can look at the tree, see what it means to be a tree, and then learn from that what it means to be a human. By the way, incidentally, this relationship between the fact that human beings can learn a lot from trees is the reason why most people on the Zoom are probably familiar with either one, Rosh Hashanah, which is the regular Rosh Hashanah that we do at the beginning of the year, or if you're aware of a second one, it's the only other one we celebrate. Tu B'Shvat, or the 15th of Shvat, which is the Rosh Hashanah for trees. And that's when we celebrate. It turns out there are other Rosh Hashanahs. There's a Rosh Hashanah for animals. There's a Rosh Hashanah for kings. There's a Rosh Hashanah for other things that's discussed in the Talmud, but we never celebrate or even talk about those. I mean, they have some Talmudic relevance, but we only celebrate Tu B'Shvat because of this parallel that we have with trees. So let's do an exercise, shall we? But this one, no need to write down. If I can ask you all just to call out. If not, I'll pick on some people. What do you think human beings can learn from trees? In what way do you think human beings and trees are similar? Alex, you want to give us something? Elise? We'll pick on the people that were quiet. David, anything?
Yeah, sure.
Go for it, Alex.
Well, both intake water.
Okay, we both take water in. Anybody else? Come on. There's so many. I can think of like 20.
And nutrients, water and nutrients.
Right? Very good.
We share
Veins.
veins.
Okay, got it.
Strength comes from the root.
We both come from a root.
No, strength comes from the root.
Oh, our strength comes from our roots. Got
That
it.
we don't necessarily see, but without it, we can't live.
All right. Anybody else?
We get stability from holding fast to our positions at times. And also at other times, it's good to bend, you know, the analogy of the oak versus the willow.
Yeah, those are both from trees. Yeah, being firm sometimes, standing for what's right, and being flexible at times when needed. Anybody else want to jump in here?
Yeah, the tree also gives out, I don't know if it's called photosynthesis or something, but it gives out some positiveness, which enhances the oxygen of the atmosphere.
Very good. And we should also be giving out positivity, right? Very good. Anybody think about the fact that we both start from a seed, a very, very small seed, and in that seed somehow we're all inclusive in that? I always like that element of it.
Survival is based on the ability to adapt.
Yes, our ability to adapt to our environment, no matter what's going on around us. That's a good one. One of my favorite ones is also trees are very, very sensitive. Like they can be impacted greatly when they're very young, and it's very difficult to change that when they're older. Think of like trauma as, or even positive education as a child, right? So tree. You ever see just now on Corson Street on my block? For those that come off the freeway at Lake, you notice that they just gave us back our lane finally, and they put up trees on the side there, and every one of those trees has the 2 guideposts that they put next to it, right, to make sure the tree is going straight. The reason for that is once a tree is already firm and a full-fledged tree, it's very difficult to change its direction. But when it's young, right, they're very moldable, very impressionable when they're young, just like human beings. There's a lot of things we can learn from a tree. I think probably the most basic is the fact that a tree is very much in tune with who it is, very much aligned with who it is. It has roots. Those roots are connected to the earth. The earth is where it comes from, and it's very much aligned with where it comes from. You never see, human beings are constantly trying. We're swimming under the oceans, through the oceans. We're flying up in space. We don't necessarily stay connected to where we come from. Trees are very much in line with who they are. But for today, let's focus on 4 areas, okay? In addition to the fact that a tree doesn't wander, let's talk about 4 ways that a tree is in line with its core identity, and those are 4 strong lessons that we can learn and that the Torah does learn from a tree for our lives, and they are, number 1, growth, number 2, productivity, number 3, giving, and number 4, relationships. And the common denominator here is, basically, the point that we're making is that these are 4 points that are so core to being a human being that if we're not doing them, we are automatically going to feel like we're not living a meaningful life, because we're not aligned with who we are. Just like the artist that is at a desk job, if we're not growing, if we're not being productive, if we're not giving, and if we're not involved in meaningful relationships, as human beings, we don't feel human. That's the point. We feel like we're not in tune with who we really are at our core. And these are 4 powerful lessons that we can take from a tree. All right, so that's in the remainder of today's lesson, in the 60 minutes that are left, that's what we're going to be doing. So let's start off with the first one, which is growth, okay? And I'd like to start off by quoting from the Talmud, text 4, where the Talmud compares human beings to trees. David, can you read for us, please, on page 10? David?
Which one? I don't have the printout.
Oh, you don't have the printout. Okay, sorry. So maybe Elise, do you have the handout?
Yes, for today.
Okay. So on page 10,
okay.
Text 4, it's titled Humans and Trees. It comes from the Talmud. Go ahead.
Humans and trees. What is the meaning of the verse? For the tree of the field is a human. Is man actually a tree of the field? Earlier in the same verse it is written, "For from them you shall eat, and you shall not cut them down." And it is written in the next verse, "However, if it is a tree that you know is not a food tree, you may destroy and cut it down." This indicates that there are certain trees that may be cut down, while others may not be destroyed. How so? If a Torah scholar is worthy, from them you shall eat, and you shall not cut them down. But if he is not worthy, he may you destroy and cut down.
The Talmud explains the comparison between human beings and trees by speaking about a worthy tree versus an unworthy tree. In other words, a worthy scholar or an unworthy scholar. And what is the difference between them? Whether he has fruit or he doesn't have fruit. Okay? Now, we don't fully understand what this means yet, but we know that a worthy scholar, enjoy you spend time around him. An unworthy scholar, cut him down. In other words, part ways with him. Go away. Not a good idea. Beautiful. It all makes sense now, right? Okay, not quite yet. A lot more to understand here. The Talmud's answer is that human beings are compared to trees metaphorically. But why? In other words, the tree is a metaphor for a Torah scholar. But why specifically the metaphor of a tree? Why is this the explanation, right? That it has fruits or it doesn't have fruits. What happened to all the other explanations? We just gave a whole host of reasons why human beings are compared to trees. Why is the metaphor is that, oh, you want to know why a human being is a tree? Because either he can have fruits or he cannot have fruits. He can be worthy or he can be unworthy. It seems to me that the essence of the comparison between a human being and a tree is the difference between is that a human being can choose to have fruits or not have fruits. And we're going to answer this question in a bit, but first let me explain. One area from which we derive meaning is growth, self-improvement, becoming a better person. Why is that? It's not just because we take pleasure and feel fulfilled when we're growing. It's because, like a tree, at our core, we are meant to be growing people. We are meant to be human beings that grow. A human being, in other words, by his very nature, is not meant to be stagnant. And when we're stagnant, we feel unstimulated. We feel unhuman to a degree. In other words, we feel like we're not fulfilling our potential if we're not growing. And this desire for self-betterment is something it's so inherent to our nature. Take a look at the way King Solomon puts it. He even points it out in our physique. Mark, if you could read for us, please, text 5, Ascending Spirit.
Okay. How many understand that the spirit of the human ascends on high, while the spirit of the beast descends to the earth?
King Solomon says, you know what the main difference between a human being and an animal is? He says it's so easy to just fall into this assumption that human beings are glorified animals. We're just evolved and complex primates. But actually, he says, there's a big difference between a human being and an animal. And it's all reflected in the way that they walk. He says, take a look at an animal walking around on all fours. Automatically, the way that it looks is down. It looks down at the ground. That's where it's always looking. One of the biggest things about a human being, we talk about the fact that we walk on two legs, right? But it's not just that we walk on two legs, it's that gives us the ability to look up, to strive upwards, to look for greater, to try to grow beyond ourselves and to be more than who we are just at our very nature. This is most inherent when the animalistic side of us rears its ugly head. Why? When a primate, when an animal chooses to just when it has an animalistic instinct, right? The first thing it does is it listens to it. Very rarely, and we'll soon discuss those exceptions, does it ever choose to overcome that instinct. And even if it does, it's only in order that it gets some other instinctual pleasure. Human beings, on the other hand, are actually capable of overcoming our instinctual desires and striving to be higher than just an animal. Striving to grow, yes, I have an anger management issue, but I'm going to choose to hold back on my anger and not succumb to that desire or animalistic instinct that I have. You know where I find this most illustrated? In the Yiddish word mensch. The word mensch is one of the many Yiddish words. Maybe we could do this as an exercise. Maybe people can throw out. Anybody know of any Yiddish words? Just because there's some people on this course that are also taking the Yiddish course, so this is a fun thing to do. Any Yiddish words that you know of that made it into the English lexicon? Anybody?
Chutzpah.
Chutzpah, yeah, very good. Chutzpah. What was that? Tsuris, yeah, tsuris. I don't know if it made it so much in the English lexicon. I think it's just used by Jews very often. Okay. Schlep, yeah, schlep is a very good one. Nash, anybody know the word nash? That comes from Yiddish. Schmutz, you got a little schmutz on your nose right there, right? That comes from Yiddish. What was that? Which other one?
Nudge.
Nudge, yeah, nudge. Gelt, gelt. It's time to make a little gelt, right? And even the word
schluffen.
Gay schluffen. I don't know if it made it into the English lexicon. I think it's just very commonly used in Yiddish. I think the word ganef. I once read that the word ganef is in the dictionary. That is just like a thief. Anyways, but probably the most common word that everybody knows is the word mensch. And believe it or not, in Yiddish, the word mensch just means to be human. But let's take a look at the English dictionary entry for the word mensch. Danny, you want to read it for us, please? On page 11.
Mensch, a person of integrity and honor. I'm the wrong person to recite that.
It even gets its own adjective. You see that? You can be menschy. I hope everybody today is being very menschy. I find that one hysterical because it's the wrong word. I mean, in Yiddish, you would say menschlich. You wouldn't say menschy. But obviously in English, they had to make their own adjective, so that's where you get the word menschy. But actually, in reality, the word mensch in Yiddish just means to be a human, to be a person. And the reason I find this to be so fascinating is because take a look at text 6. Karen, let me ask you to read this one for us. Text 12 is from Rabbi Mendy Herson, and he makes a very interesting observation about the difference between the English word human and the Yiddish word mensch. Go ahead.
Yeah. What is the Torah definition of a human? A human is accepted for self as human. And the one decides human can consequences beyond the immediate.
I'm sorry, Karen, for some reason we're hearing you, but it's like going in and out. Maybe the mic is not close enough to your mouth.
A human can calculate consequences.
That Danny's in front of the mic. That makes sense. Okay, fine. So let's start again from the beginning of text 6. Go ahead, on page 12.
What is the Torah definition of a human? A human has the capacity for self-assessment. A human has the mental and moral capacity to override impulse. Can a dog decide to go on a diet? Conversely, a human can choose to follow his moral compass instead of his physical inclination. A human can calculate consequences beyond the immediate. That's the Torah description of a human. The Torah definition of a mensch, something we should all strive for. Interestingly, the term has different connotations when used in American parlance, or even British parlance. When a person is weak and less than noble, impulse-driven instead of morally focused, why do we say, listen, he's only human? In our vernacular, recognizing that a person is human is acknowledging his inherent weaknesses. We see a human as inherently flawed and morally feeble. We cut a guy slack because we know he can't reach a noble goal. After all, he's only human. What can you really expect from this person of flesh and blood? Think about it. The Torah Jewish term of human, mensch, is something to strive for, while the American human is a fallback position in case of moral failure.
The human being is described in the Torah as the crown jewel of creation, endowed with unequal capabilities and talents. But what makes a human being uniquely human is his ability to restrain his instincts, to overcome his impulses, to not just say, I felt this way, so therefore I took it, therefore I did it, therefore I went. No, I had that feeling, and I chose to restrain it because, for whatever reason, by the way, and we're not talking about for noble reasons necessarily, could be even just because of societal pressure. I wanted to walk around without clothing, and I chose to put on clothing because it doesn't make a difference. but I had this impulse to do this, and I didn't do this impulse because I'm a human being, and I can choose to do that. In other words, like this: both human beings and animals possess instincts, possess impulses, and possess intelligence. The difference is that an animal cannot use that intelligence to overpower its impulses or its instincts. A human being can. Only the human being can choose to grow beyond how he naturally came out of the packaging, if you will. Now, it's not an easy way out, but it is very natural. It is very natural to the identity of a human being to grow. In fact, I would argue it's less natural right? It's more natural for a human being to want to leave his parents' house than to just stay there as an adult, their 30s and their 40s. Why is that? Because we want to grow. We want to be a self-made person. We want to actually make an impact. We could just choose to stay exactly as we are as a baby. Anytime we want to be fed, our parents feed us. But we want to grow. It is inherent to being a human being. And now with this, I think we can begin to understand what the Talmud was saying earlier about a worthy scholar and an unworthy scholar. What is a worthy scholar? The Talmud goes on to describe that a worthy scholar means somebody that doesn't just have wisdom. Because wisdom, it turns out, is not what makes us human. It's true we have intellect, but intellect is not what differentiates us from the animal kingdom. The intellect that overpowers instinct, that overpowers impulse, that's what differentiates us. And that's what a worthy Torah scholar is. A worthy Torah scholar, in other words, someone who has fruit, is not just a Torah scholar. They're both Torah scholars. They're both people that are wise, that have lots of wisdom. But the Talmud says, you know which one learns from a tree? Just like a tree, a human being can choose to have fruit or not have fruit. Choosing to have fruit means to choose to grow, to choose to have, to use that intellect, to control who we are and to grow as a human being. That's very telling. It's very telling that it's not wisdom. By the way, Judaism gets a lot of airtime for being very into wisdom. We're called the people of the book, right? In the Torah, one of the biggest compliments, the biggest flattery that you can give to someone is to call a Talmid Chacham, a Torah scholar, right? But yet, here the Talmud is emphasizing that you cannot just be a Torah scholar in terms of wisdom, in terms of intellect. It needs to affect you. That intellect needs to overpower your emotions and your instincts and your impulses, so that you actually are someone who is worthy. You actually are somebody who is growing. And with this, we'll conclude our first lesson from a tree. So exercise 1.3 asks us to, and I'm not going to give too much time for this now, but whenever you feel like you have a few minutes, you can try to take a look at this exercise. You will find it to be very beneficial in your life. Try to think of ways that you have grown and improved as a human being, and which are areas that you can use improvement, and what are ways that you can implement that growth and improvement mindset in your life. So far, we have one aspect that we can learn from a tree, one characteristic that we can learn from a tree, which helps us be aligned with what it means to be a human being. Number one is growth, to self-improve. Let's move on to number two. Number two is to be productive, to actually be producing in this world. Just like a tree produces, we also as human beings will not completely feel human unless we are producing. Ron, if I can ask you to read for us, please, text 7, which comes to us from the Rebbe. It's on page 15, when you're ready. Fruitful trees.
Tree, by definition, is meant to produce fruit. Like the verse says, a tree that produces fruit. That means it grows fruit in a way where its seed is within it, meaning that each fruit contains seeds that can grow into another tree. This idea is understood by the new tree for trees on the 15th of Shvat.
The new year for trees.
New year for trees on the 15th of Shvat, because the halakhic importance of this day is all about the tree's fruits. As Rashi explains, we don't combine fruits that ripened before Shvat with those that ripened after when calculating tithes.
Okay, I'm going to ignore the tithing element. Okay, let's completely ignore that. I think it'll be a tangent that's completely unnecessary. It's also complex. It's a Talmudic subject, but let's leave the tithing element out of this. In other words, what this text is saying is that a tree's true value is measured not by how tall it grows or by how lush its leaves are, but by the quality and presence of its fruit. Is it producing or is it not producing? The Talmud makes it very clear that the way that we value a tree is based on whether it is or is not producing fruit. And that's why that when you think of Tu B'Shvat, when you think of the 15th of Shvat, the new year for trees, what do you think of? You don't think of decorating the shul with leaves or with trees or that. No, you think of fruits. You think of enjoying fruits, eating fruits, different types of fruits, seeing how the fruits grow, etc. Why is that? That's because it's not the branches or the bark that count about a tree. It's what it's producing and what it's giving off to the world. So if a tree is considered successful when it produces, the mark of our success can also be looked at the same way. Who are we as human beings? We are productive human beings. And when we're not productive, we feel non-human. And this leads to a much bigger question, right? At the risk of sounding silly, why? Why do we need to produce? Now, I know every single one of you is sure of it, that we need to produce. But have you ever bothered to ask yourself why? Why is it so important to us that we produce, right? If I gave you a job and told you you were doing some amazing things, and afterwards it turns out that it wasn't, I remember seeing once a parable of a prison inmate who was given the task of turning a wheel over and over and over again. Turning the wheel was difficult. And for 20 years, he turned this wheel every day from 9 to 5. He turned the wheel. That was the work that he did in prison. And he built these things in his imagination about all sorts of things that he was doing. Turning this wheel, probably there's a mill on the other side and I'm producing flour, or maybe it's working its way through water and the water is turning something else and the pressure. And he built these fantasies in his head about what nobody ever told him what he was doing by turning the wheel. But every day he had to turn the wheel for hours and hours and hours and hours. And when the time finally came, after 20 years for him to be released from prison, he came outside and he saw the other. The first thing he wanted to do was to see on the other side of the wheel what he was doing. And what he saw was that actually he was doing absolutely nothing. The wheel led to absolutely nothing, and it was doing nothing. It was just a heavy wheel. He would turn it around, and he was producing absolutely nothing. And he fainted and died on the spot. Passed out. Why does such a thing happen? Because as human beings, the biggest fear that we have is that everything we're doing is useless. Think about it. Even the whole search for meaning, essentially, why do we even care to search for meaning? What's wrong if there's no meaning, right? It's because we have this innate fear. To be useless is to not be human. We have to be producing. There has to be something that we're actually producing. But why? What is so important about producing? What does producing do for us? Okay, so in order to understand this, let's take a look at the mitzvah of Arla. The mitzvah of Arla is a mitzvah that every tree, for the first 3 years that it produces fruit, we are to take those fruits and we are to give them to bring them to Jerusalem and eat them in Jerusalem. There's a whole process about how it's done. We're not supposed to eat for the first 3 years, we're not supposed to eat the fruits. In the 4th year, we go and eat them in Jerusalem and thank God for them. And then from then on, we eat the fruits. Now, technical question, very technical question. What if, right, this law assumes that there's 2 ways that a tree comes into existence. Either you take an old tree and plant it in the ground, so then you don't need to do this 3 years, or you plant the tree from a seed, and then you start a new tree, so then you have the first 3 years you're not allowed to enjoy the fruits, and only from the 4th year on, and the 1st year you have to go to Jerusalem, beautiful. But what if you do something in between? What if you take an old tree and you graft it, and it turns into a new tree? Right? I don't know if we have any botanists or gardeners or whatever it is on the call here, but I'm sure you're familiar with this concept. So, this new tree, is it a new tree or is it an old tree? Right? So the Talmud gives us some guidance. Mark, if you can read for us, please, text 8, leaving directions. Mark? Looks like we lost it. All right, so Ron, if you can keep going for us, text 8, leaving directions.
How can one determine whether the young tree is self-reliant? Rabbi Bibi said in the name of Rabbi Hanina, if the leaves of the young tree are turned inward toward itself, one may be sure that it lives from the old one. If the leaves are turned toward the old tree, one may be sure that the young one is self-sustaining. Rabbi Yudan Bar Hanan said, "Here is a sign. One who eats from their friend is ashamed to look at them."
This last line is the point I want to make. Just like trees are ashamed to look at, to be facing in the direction of someone who is giving them sustenance, of another tree giving it sustenance. It will continue to turn away from that tree until it no longer gets sustenance in that tree. Then finally it can turn and face it, just like human beings. Human beings are embarrassed to look somebody else in the face, even our parents, and say, "I'm reliant on you. I cannot produce myself. You're the one who's giving me." In fact, there's a mathematical equation. We prefer to have our own produced products more than products given to us by someone else, 9 times as much. Mark, if you can read for us, please. Text 9, producing our own, on page 17. Do you have the handout? David Barron? Oh, you don't have that. Okay, so you're not reading. Okay, so let's do, I'll read this one. On page 17, text 9, producing our own. Adam rotza bekav shalo, a person prefers 1 measure of their own over 9 measures of their friends. In other words, we prefer 9 times less, but it's me that made it, it's me that did it, versus somebody else. This is the reason, by the way, why people are knitting their own sweaters, even though they all know that Banana Republic exists, and that J. Crew exists, and yet women are spending hours and hours and hours knitting their own sweaters and knitting their own blankets, etc. Right? Why? Because then I can say, I made it. This is why I made my mother meshuga when I was 12 years old to make me a scarf. I wanted a scarf that she had made, a beautiful scarf, and she was so proud of the scarf that she made me. She knitted. My mother knitted, and I have a scarf that my mother knitted for me. Right? Why? Because we place value on the fact that we put in the production element to it. We place value on the fact that we produced. So it turns out that when we produce something, we actually put a little bit of ourselves into the thing that we produce. I made this. I contributed something that didn't exist before. And that is a very human quality. As human beings, that is part of the fabric of the identity of what it means to be human. And that's why the second element that we're adding here, that we learn from trees, which helps us live in alignment with who we are, is to produce, to actually be producing something. So if we feel like we're not being meaningful, we can start now a litmus test. Number 1, are we growing? If we're not growing, maybe that's why we don't feel meaningful. We can find areas in our lives to grow. And now number 2, on page 17, we can do the same thing with productivity. We feel meaningless. We feel like we lack meaning in our lives. Are we being productive? And if we're not being productive, how can we be productive? And in what ways can we implement being more productive in our lives? And then we will feel more human, and as a result, feel more meaningful because we are aligned with who we are at our core. Number 3, giving. The great 3rd century Talmudic sage, Rabbi Nachman, lived in Babylonia. Rabbi Nachman was wealthy, he was politically well connected, and he was of a Jewish aristocracy. One day, he was hosting the visiting Rabbi Yitzchak, and they dined together and spoke words of Torah. And then it was time for Rabbi Yitzchak to leave. And before he left, Rabbi Nachman turned to him and made a request of him. Ron, can you read it for us, please? We're on page 19, text 10. Go ahead.
When they were taking leave of one another, Rabbi Nachman said to Rabbi Yitzchak, "Master, give me a blessing." Rabbi Yitzchak said to him, "I will tell you a parable. This situation is comparable to one who was walking through a desert and who was hungry, tired, and thirsty. He found a tree whose fruits were sweet and whose shade was pleasant, and a stream of water flowed beneath it. He ate from the fruits of the tree, drank from the water in the stream, and sat in the shade of the tree. When he wished to leave, he said, 'Tree, with what shall I bless you? If I say to you that your fruits should be sweet, your fruits are already sweet. If I say that your shade should be pleasant, your shade is already pleasant. If I say that a stream of water should flow beneath you, a stream of water already flows beneath you. Rather, I will bless you as follows. May it be Hashem's will that all saplings that they plant from you be like you. So it is with you. With what shall I bless you? If I bless you with Torah, you already have Torah. If I bless you with wealth, you already have wealth. If I bless you with children, you already have children. Rather, may it be Hashem's will that your offspring shall be like you.
Thank you, Ron. So here we have another Talmudic excerpt where human beings are being compared to trees, but this time we're trying to dig deeper. Until this point, we've learned the importance of growth and self-improvement. But that alone, it turns out, even though it's meaningful, will never be enough. As human beings, in addition to the importance of growing and the importance of producing, we will also always need to be giving. We need to be giving to others. We need not just to be productive, but to give to other people, to benefit others. Text 11 is based on some amazing research. Alex, do you have the text in front of you? On page 21? You want to read it for us?
Yeah, here it is.
Page 21, text 11, existential mattering.
There is a great comfort in believing that your life and actions matter in the grand scheme of things. This conviction is referred to as existential mattering and is a strong component of the experience of meaning in life. While the concept of existential mattering often evokes images of famous and infamous people who have done extraordinary things in their lives, many people gain a sense of mattering through avenues more easily traversed. Research shows that feeling that you have made a positive influence on others is, unsurprisingly, almost always associated with the belief that your life is meaningful. Existential mattering then is often rooted in the sense that you matter to others, from helping strangers in need and providing social support to loved ones to simply being a reliable friend.
We feel good about ourselves when we help other people. It might take a lot of effort, right? We may come home depleted. We may come home spent. I think this is coming to mind is Danny Levin, who volunteered who worked for the crisis line for suicide prevention, and he spoke about it being a painful experience, right? He came home spent and depleted, and it was difficult, but it was meaningful because we are giving. When a human being gives to others, it turns out we are hardwired with an innate desire and need to give. This research from Hicks and King describes actually something that Jews have known for a very, very long time. The Talmud tells us that when the great sage Rabbi Akiva, right? Raise your hands, everybody heard of Rabbi Akiva? Probably one of the most famous sages, right? Okay. When he was imprisoned by the Romans for the crime of teaching Torah, he was visited by his student, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, another very famous Talmudic sage, right? Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai asked his teacher to teach him Torah, and Rabbi Akiva refused because it was against the law. It was dangerous. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai begged. And finally, Rabbi Akiva, who continued to refuse because out of fear of Rabbi Shimon's safety, right? Finally, Rabbi Akiva turns to him and he says the following, text 12. Ron.
Rabbi Akiva responded, "My son, more than the calf desires to nurse, the cow wants to give milk."
Or elsewhere in the Talmud, this is used literally with giving. More than the benefactor benefits the pauper benefits the benefactor, the Torah says, the Talmud says. More than the poor person needs the rich person to give him money, the rich person needs someone to give to. How fascinating is this? It reminds me of text 13. Text 13 is from King David. Okay, the Medrash is telling us a story about King David. And Elise, can you read us the story? It's on page 22. I love these kind of stories because they're totally unrelatable to me. King David obviously had opportunities to talk to God. I didn't have I've never had such opportunity. I mean, I've had opportunities to talk, but he never talks back. Okay. Go ahead. Go ahead, Elise.
Soon. King David said to God, Master of the universe, establish equity in your world by making rich and poor the same. God replied, if such were the case, who would preserve kindness and truth? If all were rich or all were poor, who would be able to do acts of kindness?
Do you see what's going on here? Do you see the ridiculousness of this conversation? King David turns to God and says, God, it's up to you. Communism, right? But real communism, not communism where some are more equal than others, right? Real communism. Can you really make the people that take from the rich, give to the poor, make everybody equal? Everybody will have enough, right? I mean, everybody has thought about this at some point or another. I mean, it's really the foundation of communism, right? In theory, communism is a very good idea. Why? Because there are many people in this world who have too much, and there are many people in this world who have too little. If you just took it and spread it equally, everybody would have enough, right? So King David says, I'm not trying to build a society like this. I'm going to go straight to the source. Let's go to God. God, why don't you do it? Take away from the rich and give to the poor. But God responds with the most ridiculous statement. He says, oh, then how will people be able to give? What will become of kindness? Hello, it'll be rendered extinct. What's wrong with giving being rendered extinct? If God makes sure that everybody has, why do you need to give? Right? What Hashem is telling King David is actually a much deeper point, which is, it's not a byproduct of need. The fact that people give to other people is not only because other people need, and if nobody needed, we wouldn't give. No, it's also a byproduct of us having an innate desire to give. God created us as human beings, as people who want to give. And then He created in this world opportunities for us to give. There's things that I can give to you. There's things that you can give to me. Beautiful, fine. That's the way. That's what makes the world go round. But what we all have in common is that as human beings, to be human is to need to give. And by the way, this explains a very interesting law in Jewish law. Danny, can you read it for us, please? Text 14 is from Shulchan Aruch, the Jewish code of law, Rabbi Yosef Cairo. And he makes a very interesting point.
Everyone is obligated to give charity. Even a poor person who relies on charitable support themselves must give from what they receive.
Isn't that fascinating? You would, if giving is dependent on needing, in other words, somebody needs, therefore I give. But if there's no need, then I just keep my money for myself. Then a poor person shouldn't give. The rich people should be giving tzedakah. The poor people should not be giving tzedakah. It never says that in the Jewish code of law. Every Jew is obligated to give tzedakah. The rich man should be giving a lot more than the poor man is giving. But everybody has to give charity to other people. Someone who's broke and in debt still has to be giving a little bit to charity. Yes, he has to worry about his own family, and therefore he shouldn't be giving too much to charity. And the Talmud talks about that too. Not to be irresponsible and give too much to charity when you can't afford it. But you need to be giving. Because as a human being, it is hardwired into our very personality. You know, in 2008, there was a study done. I can send out a reference to the study that found that personal spending, in other words, on bills or whatever, on vacations, never correlates with happiness. You can pay off your own debt, you can go on vacations, you can pay off your mortgage, everything, but it will never lead. It never correlates when they do control studies. The statistics will never correlate with happiness, whereas giving, in other words, gifts or donations, spending money on others, almost always relates to significantly greater well-being. The cool part about this is that they took this one step further. To test these findings further, the researchers looked at employees who were receiving a bonus from their company. Those who spent more of the bonus on others reported greater happiness than those who spent more of it on themselves. And the key factor is it had nothing to do with the size of the bonus. The bonus could have been $20,000 or the bonus could have been $5,000. The only thing that really mattered was across the board, even if it was in small amounts, even as little as $5 spent on someone else brought more happiness to a person than $5 spent on themselves. And I think this gives us successfully our third core element that we can learn from a tree about what it means to be human. To be human is to be a growing person, it is to be a producing person, and it is to be a giving person. And if we are not giving, then we will not feel human, and as a result, we will feel empty, and we will lack meaning in our lives. So as a result, on page 23, you're given an opportunity to fill out an exercise. How can I be a more giving person in my life? Okay, and finally, on page, which page are we on here? Page 25, we continue with number 4. Number 4, the fourth overarching element which makes a human being a human and which is necessary in order to live a meaningful life is to have genuine relationships. Let's open with text 15. Alex, if you can read for us, please, on page 25, text 15. Alex, with it? Yep, there you go.
Yep. Let me see 1 second here.
Meaningful belonging.
If you ask people what their most significant sources of meaning in life are, they perhaps unsurprisingly list their close relationships. That's because one of the pillars of a meaningful life is a sense of belonging. When people feel like they belong, according to psychologists Mark Leary and Roy Baumeister, it's because they are in relationships with others based on mutual care.
Thank you, Alex. We often think of meaning in terms of solitude, right? Like, how do you find meaning in life? Go up to the top of a mountain, be quiet, sit on a beach for hours and hours on end. Don't be with other people, because when you're with other people, it's distracting, etc. Those things are all true. It's true, that these things, that human beings can be distracting to other human beings. But also, it is important for us to be involved in meaningful relationships. It's a very simple point, but it's profound. We derive a sense of purpose and self-worth through belonging, as being part of a group, as being part of mutual care. And this too can be learned from a tree. The California redwoods are some of the, raise your hands if you've seen the California redwoods. They're gorgeous. If you haven't, we all live in such close proximity to them. You should definitely make your way up there. It's gorgeous. The California redwoods are some of the tallest and oldest living things on Earth. They grow to heights of over 300 feet and live for thousands of years. And you might expect that their strength comes from deep, solid roots, right? Some people mentioned that at the beginning of today's lesson, that one of the things we can be compared to trees with is with deep, deep roots. But actually, yeah, very good. Dave is posting that loneliness is the most negative influencer on health globally, right? I think the Surgeon General recently announced that we're in a loneliness pandemic, right? He declared a state of emergency with regards to loneliness, right? Danny, I think you mentioned that to me as well. Now, so you would expect that redwoods would have very, very deep roots, right? But it turns out, actually, that's not the case. Redwoods have very, very shallow roots. They often go just 10 to 13 feet vertically. But what gives them their strength is that their roots spread horizontally for 60 to 80 feet. You've heard of this before, Dave? It's an amazing fact. They interlock with the roots of other trees, the neighboring trees, and those neighboring trees with other trees, etc. And beneath the surface, it turns out they are holding each other up. Now, there are additional factors. I'm not gonna say it's all dependent on this. They have very thick bark, apparently, so they're immune to wildfires, or at least very fire retardant. And there's probably something to learn from that for human beings as well, to have a thicker skin or whatever we can learn from that. But this element I found fascinating, that they form a community underground, like a support system, literally like human beings, underneath the ground that supports them. That's us. No matter how strong someone appears, no matter how much they've grown on their own, and they produce on their own, and they give on their own, and they might be the biggest and most amazing human beings, our strength comes from connections with others. But why? As usual, let's ask the obvious. Why? Why is connecting with someone else, why is that such a human, why is it so important to us? Let's take a look at a verse in the Torah. And what we're going to do now is an interesting thing, okay? Danny, I'm going to ask you to read both of them for us. Okay? You're going to read for us text 16a and 16b. Now, 16a is going to be a verse from Genesis. You're all going to be familiar with that.
16a, God.
1 second, don't read it yet. I'm just reading what David Barron was adding here. We'll talk about that in just a second. But I want to explain what's going to happen here. 16a is a verse from Genesis. You'll all have heard of this verse. 16b is a translation of that verse from Genesis, okay? But it is the oldest translation of the verse in Genesis. In other words, it's going to be a translation to Aramaic. This is the first translation of the Torah that ever existed. It's before the Septim, what's it called? The Septim, whatever, the 70, the Greek translation. Before that, come again? Septuagint, okay. Before that, there was an Aramaic translation, which was done by a rabbi. Actually, he was a convert to Judaism. For those of you that attended last year, we gave a course, and we did it. It was like a historical course. We did a whole session on him. His name was Onkelos. He was a Roman scholar who then became a Jew, and he wrote a translation. And in the most brilliant way, he translates through. He comments through translation. In other words, often he'll choose a unique or interesting word to translate, which then provides a whole new insight on the verse. And that's what's going to happen here in his translation. So if you can read it for us, I know you're going to be reading them both in English, but they've done their best to translate the Aramaic to English in the second one in a different way in order that you get his commentary. Go ahead, 16a.
So version 1, God formed the human from the dust of the earth, and he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the human became a living being.
Okay, I imagine we're all familiar with this verse. Now, how does he translate it?
And Onkelos' version, God created man, dust from the earth, and he breathed into his nostrils the soul of life, and the human became a speaking spirit.
So that last two words, which means lenefesh chaya, nefesh means a soul or a spirit, chaya means living, and so the proper translation is the first one, the English one, became a living being, but he translated it as a speaking being, right? Why would he change it? The reason is because, and probably the better translation to English would be, to Onkelos, communicating with other people is key to being human. He says when God turned him into a nefesh chaya, into a living being, to live is to communicate with others, to speak with others, to converse, to communicate with others, and to be a part of a fabric of a society. And this is why all over Jewish literature, you will often find the four kingdoms, right? So they'll talk about the inanimate kingdom, and the plant kingdom, and the animal kingdom, and then there's the human kingdom, right? When they talk about the human species, they're often called the medaber, the ones that speak, the speakers, the communicators. That's who they are. And this is so by many different commentary. Let's see how Rambam, Maimonides, in his Guide for the Perplexed, Ron, if you can read for us, please, text 17, he also describes human beings as what? As social. Go ahead.
Human beings are social by nature, and their nature compels them to gather together with others. They are not like other living creatures, which have no necessity to congregate. Rather, their nature requires social gathering as an absolute necessity.
The Rambam's insight is that people are not merely inclined to socialize, we are dependent on it. As human beings, we are required to socialize. It is hardwired, it's like a need that we have. Just like we need to eat, and we need to drink, we need to sleep, we need to socialize. Now, you might be more introverted or more extroverted, that's fine, but we need to be part of a fabric of a society. We need to communicate with others. And this is going to form the final leg of our four pillars of what it means to be human. So you can now do this litmus test. If you find that your life feels a little bit meaningless, a little empty for whatever reason, right? And you start to go through and you find that you're actually giving, you're producing, and you're growing, but you're not socializing, if you're not in meaningful relationships with other people, you will notice that immediately you start to feel empty. Why? Because you're not in line with who you are as a human being. To be a human being, according to the Kabbalah, is to be someone who, let's go through them again, one at a time. To be a human being is to be someone that A, produces, B, gives, C, grows, and D, now that we've added, I'm sorry, I did a little out of order, and D, now that we've added, is also who communicates, who has relationships, who is involved in some sort of societal group. So on page 27, we're encouraging you to find areas in your life where you can have more meaningful relationships. And by the way, I want to point something out here. Meaningful relationships does not necessarily need to mean that you're giving up of yourself for someone else. I mean, you always are to some degree or another, right? You're giving up of your time, but it doesn't have to mean that you're sacrificing with someone else. Picking up the phone and calling someone and asking them, how is your day going? Just want to check in on you without anything that you're asking for in return is one of the most meaningful things a human being can do. Why? Because it actually expresses two of the core things to do of what it means, of being in line with what it means to be a human being, to be giving and to be in relationships, right? And this is why when you think about the way you have felt when someone calls you, whether you just lost a loved one or it's just a random day, and somebody calls you, hey, I just want to see how you're doing. I want to check in with you. The reason that's so meaningful to us, the reason that feels so powerful to us is because you feel like you're in a relationship. And that is the fourth and final point we are going to be making in today's lesson about what it means to be a human being. I was going to summarize, but instead of summarizing, there's a beautiful video that summarizes the 4 points that we just made. So please, when you have a moment, please turn your attention to the video screens for this video.
We live in an age of unprecedented freedom. Go anywhere. Do anything. and still hollow inside. Comfort surrounds us. Warmer homes, softer beds, but comfort alone doesn't satisfy the soul. Wealth is at an all-time high. Packages always arriving, gadgets galore, and yet so many feel empty. Security has never been higher. Passwords, alerts, cameras everywhere, and still, anxiety is at an all-time high. So if security, wealth, comfort, and freedom can't fill us, what can? The Torah says we're like trees. Want to feel alive? Watch the tree. Here are 4 lessons. A tree never stops growing. We're the same. Our souls crave steady inner growth. Trees are productive. Just look at their fruit. We're wired like that too. We feel fulfilled when we generate sweet, lasting, meaningful deeds. Fruit isn't for the tree, it's for giving. Our souls are the same. We feel deep joy specifically when we share and care. A tree intertwines its roots with other trees, lending each other support. We need that too. Relationships are our source of strength. True freedom is growth. True comfort is productivity. True wealth is giving. True security is in relationships. So feed your soul and watch your life bloom.
Oops. Okay, there we go. And I think this video really did such a fantastic job of summarizing the points that we made in today's lesson, that the first layer of meaning that we're saying is that if you want to live a meaningful life, try living in line with who you are as a human being. You're not an animal. You're not a tree. You're not a flower. You're not a piece of food. You're not a rock or a mineral. You are a human being. It's worth it to appreciate what it means to be a human being and to try to live in line with that. And today we spoke about 4 ways why, and there are more, but these 4 I think are pretty crucial. Okay. But is that enough? Is that enough? If we're being honest, many of us know people who live lives that are full of giving, full of growth, full of productivity, and full of connection. They have good relationships, they're married, they have good businesses, and they're giving philanthropically to others, right? And yet, they still feel annoying emptiness. Maybe we've even felt it ourselves. Maybe we have all these 4 things, and we still feel a little bit empty at times. What's missing? For this, I invite you to join me next week for lesson 2 of, I told you it was going to be a cliffhanger every week, for lesson 2 of the Kabbalah of meaning, which is called To Make or Not to Make Meaning. Now I'd like to ask you to turn your attention to the video screens for a summary of today's lesson. It's a little redundant. I don't know why they did 2 summaries, but that's what they did. So we're going to watch it because it's a video. Why not? Oh, where'd it go?
Lesson 1. The meaning we seek. 1. Although we live in an era of unprecedented prosperity, depression, anxiety, and substance abuse have reached record levels globally. One of the root causes of the current mental health crisis epidemic is a lack of meaning, a feeling that life is an exercise in futility. 2. We feel meaningful, complete, and settled when we act in ways that are aligned with our core, and we lack meaning when we suffer from misalignment. 3. Based on the Torah's comparison of humans to trees, we identified 4 qualities that define our identities: growth, productivity, helping others, and genuine relationships. 4. We humans are defined by our capacity for growth. We are distinguished from animals in our capacity to control our instincts and work on ourselves to grow and improve. When we are growing, we are expressing our essential humanity, and thus we feel complete. 5. The mark of our success is not only what we are, but what we produce. We have a deep human need to be a contributor, not a person who is dependent on the largesse of others. 6. The desire and need to give to others is hardwired into our human identity, and we can only feel fulfilled when we are benefiting the world around us. 7. Jewish thought has always described the human being as a communicator, capable of connecting with others deeply and spiritually. Tapping into this deepest part of our being provides us with an incredible sense of meaning.
Thank you all for joining us for Lesson 1. This has been The Meaning We Seek, and I look forward to seeing you all next week as we tackle Lesson 2, To Make or Not to Make Meaning. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, Rabbi.